And now for our top international story this hour, we focus in on a revolutionary development out of Bolivia. On Sunday, the world marked the elimination of violence against women when feminists and progressive people around the world rallied under the slogan, "Viva nos queremos." In English, "We want us alive." The next day, Bolivian President Evo Morales announced the creation of a special women's defense cabinet agency, the Plurinational Service of Women and Depatriarchalization.
We have decided to create a special cabinet to fight against gender violence and violence against children. A cabinet composed by 7 ministers that are going to lead the cabinet in coordination with women associations from all over Bolivia, from the cities or the countryside. There is an enormous responsibility to end violence against women that we see every day in the media.
There are few countries in the world that have advanced the women's liberation as fast as Bolivia. 10 years ago, women held 4% of posts in municipal assemblies. In 2015, they held half of those municipal posts. But violence and attacks against women remains a huge problem. This year, the number of reported complaints of harassment and political violence against women jumped 6 times from last year. According to the country's Office of State Attorney General, 85 cases of femicides were reported in Bolivia just between January and September of this year. Morales highlighted on Twitter that many of the laws intended to combat violence against women are not being applied. While Evo Morales' socialist administration is taking more decisive action to tackle the problem, few other governments in the hemisphere are following suit. In 2014, an Argentine court sentenced a woman to 8 years in prison for aggravated homicide just for having a miscarriage. Right now, Guatemala is considering a law that would totally ban abortion, as well as make miscarriages a criminal offense. According to a 2017 UN report, 2 out of 3 women killed in Central America are victims of femicide. Honduras has the highest rate per capita, where it's estimated that a woman is murdered every 16 hours. The UN estimates the country has a 95% impunity rate for crimes of sexual violence and femicide. These conditions have prompted women throughout the Americas to make their demands clear. With the rights and survival of women in the hemisphere in question, we turn to producer for In Question, Cale Holmes. Cale, thank you for being here. Why do you think Bolivia is taking such a proactive step on violence against women?
Well, it's good to be here, Sarah. I have to say, this is something that we see comes from a precedent that is taking place throughout the hemisphere. Women are standing up and they're refusing to tolerate violence, to tolerate rape culture, femicide, and oppression in all its forms. And this is something that has been taking root in Bolivian society for a while now. I mean, ever since Evo Morales came to power through, his the victory of his party MAS in 2006, Bolivia has been carrying out all kinds of reforms to increase women's participation and empowerment in the society. And it's not really a paternalistic top-down gesture. I mean, this is because MAS, which controls the Bolivian state, is a vehicle of the Bolivian grassroots, which is defined by the women's struggle. I mean, even back during the turn of the century in Cochabamba, we saw water wars where Bechtel was trying to privatize the water utilities there. And women mainly came out en masse to protest that. I mean, most of the irrigation unions in Cochabamba were women. They get up at 1 and 2 in the morning, and when their livelihoods rather were threatened, they were thrust into leadership roles. And that's why I think Bolivia, its political culture has a feminist characteristic which is taking root.
Where do you think that political will in Bolivia comes from to take such a big step and to really step up on this violence?
Well, I mean, it definitely comes from the people. You know, Bolivia is a country, like many countries in the Americas, like all countries, that has been subject to colonialism, that's been subject to, you know, patriarchy by various institutions, you know, the Catholic Church. But the difference with Bolivia from other countries in the hemisphere is that, you know, where reactionaries are implementing a backlash to the gains of women's rights, instead of backing away, Bolivia knows it needs to double down. You know, there's still a lot of material progress that hasn't reached women, hasn't reached some indigenous groups in Bolivia. Even so, Bolivia knows that it exists in a neoliberal world, and it cannot afford but to take a more militant and defiant route in the women's struggle and upholding women's liberation. And that's why I think we see, you know, Bolivia is trying to consolidate women's empowerment. There's a law that, you know, mandates that, you know, half of all elected posts in Bolivia have to be women, and there's a lot of political will there to take care of things like reproductive rights, you know, which is a very critical issue all across Latin America, where the Catholic Church is in power. And it's no surprise that violence against women is a priority now as well.
Well, especially in that side of the hemisphere, absolutely. Now, this agency is being named after Ana Maria Romero de Campero. Who was she, and how was she so influential in pushing this violence against women?
Well, she was a very prolific human rights activist and journalist in Bolivia. You know, she was one of the instrumental voices against the dictatorship of Hugo Banzer back in the 1970s. Banzer took Bolivia more into the Operation Condor program, which was spearheaded in many ways by U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. Brutal dictator, but she was one of the defining voices in speaking up for Bolivia's people. She also was a, you know, frequent source of social progress, like a voice for social progress that inspired many women in the country, that always advocated for Bolivia's social welfare. Evo Morales convinced her to run for, you know, Bolivia's Senate when she was, you know, still living, to represent La Paz, and she became president of the Bolivian Senate, a post she held till her death. And she advocated many reforms, and, you know, was one of the leading voices in making sure that women's liberation was a part of Bolivia's political mission.
Well, and her voice was heard. We have about less than a minute left, but I want to get this question in. Now, violence against women is indeed a major issue here throughout the hemisphere. What are the biggest obstacles to ending women's violence, women's oppression?
Right. Well, I think that, you know, especially throughout the hemisphere, including in the United States and Canada, we've seen an upsurge, I feel, in violence against women, and women of color especially have, women in general have taken a stance against that, but they're still persistent in poverty and underdevelopment and rape culture. All these things relate to one another, and with, you know, decolonizing and the legacy that people in Bolivia and people all throughout the hemisphere have, I think, you know, despite the fact that there's a lot of roadblocks ahead, I have no doubt that the people will prevail in making sure that, you know, violence against women is eradicated.
Well, it's definitely a step forward coming from Bolivia. Thank you so much, Cale Holmes.
Thank you.
Hey YouTube, thanks for checking out our channel. We hope you enjoyed the video. We have tons of content for you just like this. For more of RT America's one-of-a-kind news and analysis, be sure to subscribe and never stop questioning more.